Welcome to the Detroit's Town Hall Series, Content and Conversations on Race. I'm Marshall Favors, Program Manager for New Detroit. This episode is our year in review. We'll take a look back on conversations we had around some crucial topics about race that impacted us all in 2020. We launched with a powerful introduction around ideas of race through a historical context. Our first town hall was called The Origins of Race and the Historical Impact of Systemic Racism. It featured historians Robert Smith, president of History Remake, Jamon Jordan of Black Scroll History Network and Tours, and Ken Coleman, a journalist with Michigan Advance. Let's take a look.
This is another important chart. In 1735, European scientists and intellectuals began to develop these theories of racial classification. At this time, the world has never known, people were not divided up by any sort of classification. And so race and enslavement now exist. And so now they're trying to justify it. Now they're trying to come up with a theory for why you can enslave Africans. And part of that is also this emergence of the concept of whiteness. This is relatively new. This occurs during the colonial period. Before then, people did not call themselves white. Black people did not call themselves black. And so you have this description from Jefferson where he's using the term white and he's using the term black. And so this is relatively new. And this is another point I want to make about before we end my part of the presentation. Now, one of the things that happens in this country when we talk about the Constitution and we talk about the fact that all men are created equal, and we have this sort of issue of race and unequalness in this country. Well, what many people don't understand about the Constitution and about the Declaration of Independence is that Jefferson did not necessarily write this. He borrowed most of these ideas. Most of what's in this Constitution comes from John Locke, the philosopher. Okay, that's where Jefferson gets all of these, many of these ideas that he's writing about in the Constitution. Now, one of the things that Locke says in his theories, his political theories, is that if you're captured in war, then you're not a man. You cannot be classified as a human being. You're property. Okay, that's an important concept. The other thing he says in his writings is that if you have land and you're not using it and it's not being cultivated, then you have no right to that land. Someone else who's going to cultivate it can come along and take it. This is directed at the Native Americans. The concept of property is directed at people of African descent who are now enslaved, because the idea is that they were captured in war in Africa and brought here as property. So this is what the white men, they knew this when they wrote the Constitution, that African Americans and people who were enslaved were never meant to be part of this sort of human race that exists. And so it's the law, it's the Constitution that sort of enshrines slavery. And lastly, slavery would have probably
Our second episode was presented in partnership with Bridge Detroit and moderated by Orlando Bailey, engagement director for Bridge Detroit and co-host and producer of the podcast Authentically Detroit. In this episode, Orlando explored the topic of race, law enforcement, and the criminal justice system with guests Malika Clark, CEO of the Hudson Weber Foundation, and Darnell Blackburn with MCOLS.
We're having a lot of conversations right now about the criminal justice system. And there are folks that say that the criminal justice system is broken. And there are folks that say that the criminal justice system is working exactly how it was designed to work. And you lifted up a stat earlier that talked about Black bodies, Black people making up a significant majority of the prison population, with only being, 5% of the nation population. So talk about what sort of rises to the top for you when we talk about what needs to be addressed within the criminal justice system.
Sure. And it's all, of course, interrelated. When we think about the conversation that's happening because of the George Floyd incident and everything that happened subsequently, and that's still happening, that's police brutality. And I think that what we need to channel too is that this is an entire system that is brutalizing African American communities. And so for me, this mass incarceration piece, so I gave you like that top line number, just how out of whack we are in general. When you start, looking at racial disparities in Michigan, I think we're 14% of the population. We're about half of the prison population. And when you look at long sentences in the state, we're over 60% of those serving long sentences. And the implications for that, not just for the individual. So like, are we getting our money's worth in terms of more safety, more well-being in communities? I would say we are not. The implications for families that lose a father, and looking at the data on sort of the likelihood of their children then in turn being incarcerated. Obviously, not having someone there to be part of the social fabric of the family and of the community. We're literally looking at communities where at any one point, folks are just churning in and out of jail and prison. We actually, and you look at sort of there's, I think that those disparities have made our country, because of racism, very complacent around that type of, that we're, incarcerating this many people, and that we may not be getting our money's worth. Again, in Michigan, I think since the 80s, our prison spending has gone up 250%. Our has decreased by 50%. So that's we're investing enormous capital into the system and not investing in our communities. And I think that's where the conversation needs to happen. And again, it's the incarceration people, as folks come out, their employment prospects, as you might imagine, their earning prospects, all of that is incredibly diminished by having a criminal record. But the other thing, and this has been, in a well-researched and vetted study, when you look at whites and blacks with criminal records, it was a study that sent testers, white and black, where some indication that they had a criminal record. And it showed that, all the biases that we know about in employment just for black people are overdetermined when you have a criminal record. So if you have a criminal record, the same as what a white person would have, you are penalized more for it than you would if you were white. And in fact, the study showed that even whites with a criminal record were still doing better for callbacks for jobs than blacks with a criminal record. So it just, the biases that we already have are sort of justified for folks that are carrying them, and then they act out on it. And when you think that 1 in 3 black men are going to be incarcerated, and, the number that have contact with the system, it's sobering. The other piece is just, the police part. You've got the brutality issue, but they're also the front door to the jails. And when you look at the jails, we just did a study in Wayne County to see the drivers of the Wayne County jail population. The largest category of admissions is around driver's license suspensions.
Like, why are we locking people up for that, really?
Precisely. It's not about public safety. That's about being poor.
Okay.
And people are black.
Why is that?
We're allowing that to happen. And you think about, even if folks that are in there just for a couple of days, the disruption for most folks, if you have a job, if you are a single parent, are profound. You pay money for that.
Absolutely.
That's what keeps me up at night.
Yeah, and my follow up to you, Malenka, is you are the head of a foundation. You are a person that works for an institution that folks will and may see as a part of the system. How are you leveraging the resources that the foundation has to solve for this? And how are you sort of, walking and chewing gum at the same time with trying to disrupt the system, but also from the outside looking in, being seen probably as part of this system of mass oppression of Black and Latinx folks in America?
Sure. No, and I appreciate the question, Orlando. So, when we have an overarching mission of improving the quality of life in the city, but our board has signed on to a shared prosperity agenda when we launched our new strategy in 2017. And so we're being really intentional around addressing racial inequity and structural barriers to opportunity. So our Safe and Just portfolio, I mentioned the Vera study that we funded, some Weber funds. But also the other work that we're doing is through a collaborative called the Michigan Justice Fund. So we, with other funders, are really putting our capital behind this collaborative where right now, because the other thing that often happens with funders is that we see the problem and come in and say, well, we have all the answers and this is how it's going to be. Actually hearing from folks that are, experiencing it and practitioners that are on the ground every day.
Thank you for naming that.
Right now, yes, currently in this very deliberate process of, we have a learning cohort of practitioners who are getting some, operating support for participating in this learning journey with us, but they are informing our grant making plan, which we'll be announcing in January. And the idea is around putting resource and support around a thriving, enabling environment where we've got grassroots organizations well resourced, and that the linkages between them and the folks that are doing the work in Lansing are very strong. But also, I came out of government and I'm in a foundation, I'm a pragmatist. And what we need to do is make sure that we've got diverse allies on these issues, that we have constituents, not just in Detroit, but folks on the west side of the state that care about this. So we're being very deliberate about those linkages too. And we, also want to use our voice as philanthropy with the power that we come and bring with it to say we care about this. This is unacceptable.
Thank you, Malenka. Look forward to the announcement. Hopefully, you will leverage the partnership with Bridge Detroit to make that announcement. I'm going to do a shameless plug.
Indeed, nice plug.
Darnell, I want to bring you in and sort of ask the same question around how you are disrupting this well-oiled machine from within. You are a practitioner. Currently, you have worked within this system for 27 years. What do you see as a top priority in law enforcement today when we talk about change? And how are you sort of, walking with this tension of wanting to see change and disrupt the system, but also being a part of it?
I'm gonna throw something to Malenka just for a second. Your last question is not directed toward her, but just to speak in support. I can firsthand talk about, not about what's going on yet, but definitely that to understand that that Hudson Weber Foundation, they do reach out to practitioners, and that's kind of the relationship that we're establishing, because they want to get out here and show that not just put money behind something that's just going to be useless, but they care. And so that's my plug for them, because we've actually had some communications about this thing prior to this right now. So just wanted to touch on that, so that we are, they are working toward this goal, as well as I and other organizations. So for me personally, my organization, this George Floyd, this thing that occurred is nothing new. And I say, if to answer your question, or to get to the answer to your question, to see that was so disheartening, disturbing, so angry. It made us all feel so many different emotions. And for those of us who have been fighting in the trenches for so long on this law enforcement thing, who wanted to see this improvement, now it has come to fruition, unfortunately, at the hands of something so disgusting. So, I went from frustrated and wanting to give up to being energized and empowered. And so this right now is the time for reform. I'm not a defund. I will say it's not defunding. I think it's refunding, reallocating funds, which is what it should be called, 'cause that's what they're speaking of anyway. But it's the time for reform and reallocation. And so for me, I'm encouraged. I was very discouraged. But I'm very encouraged. And one of the things that I do and will continue to do through my company, through my personal promotion and pushing is to recruit more diversity. You heard me talk about it, and I think that these police departments need to look like the communities that they serve. And so, really getting a handle on and reaching back into these communities and saying, we need you. We need you.
Amid COVID-19, something we all were affected by this year. We explored the impact of the global pandemic and racial justice movements on our youth and families as related to them academically, socially, and emotionally. Our moderator was Karen Dumas, and she facilitated a profound conversation between guests Dr. Helen Oliver Brooks with Wayne Risa and Gilda Jacobs, President and CEO of the Michigan League for Public Policy.
Where do we go from here? I mean, because at a certain point, as you indicated, we've been dealing with these issues for the longest, which I think is almost inexcusable. I mean, it really is. We have 77,000, count them, nonprofit organizations in the state of Michigan, the majority of which are located or focused on issues to address in the city of Detroit. Why are we still having the conversation? Why are we still trying to solve problems that it almost appears that we somehow perpetuate? Either of you can, or both of you can weigh in.
I think that we don't, there once upon a time was a saying in the African-American community is what happens in this house stays in this house. Mm-hmm. Often reach out for the support for fear of being judged by someone that I might need to seek some additional help outside the home. So sometimes it's because they don't know. Sometimes it's because they don't want others to know. And they risk many challenges, even what it's doing to the children, to avoid being found out. Yes, the resources are there, and many of our families can tell you what the resources are and how to get them, but choose not to access those.
And so, from a former legislator's lens, I can tell you that there has been the systematic dismantling of our safety net system over many, many years. We've put a cap on the number of months and weeks you can receive benefits. We reduced the number of weeks that you can get unemployment insurance. We have, until recently, had an asset test on food assistance. There is a ban on receiving food assistance if you have 2 drug felonies, and even though you've already paid your time and you're out and want to start, your life again. We have some very, very bad policies that don't help people have greater opportunities, that actually create more barriers for success. And we really need to take a look at what those are. State government should not be creating barriers. State government should be reducing barriers to help people have the opportunities to feed their family and work and take care of themselves. So, I think we really need to take a look at what those policies are. And then on top of it, we also have in the legislature what I call Detroit fatigue, flip fatigue. There are legislators who are saying, I don't want to send any more money to Detroit. What about my backyard? What about the people in my district? But they're often not making the connection. They're also often not connecting those dots that, you lift all boats when you help people have better schools and increase the number of dollars that go into school districts, where you help people have access to food. It helps everybody. But for some reason, there is this thinking that if you do something to improve the safety net, it's not going to help the people in your district. And I am for years just been flummoxed that, by that thinking, because it's just not true.
So as we moved deeper into the election season, we featured a 2-part episode focused on voter preparedness and voter suppression. Part 1 hit on core issues of race in America. Here's a conversation moderated by Hester Wheeler, Assistant Secretary of State for the state of Michigan, with his guest Hassan Jaber, President and CEO of Access, and Rana Ilmer, Deputy Director of the ACLU. Let's take a listen to what they had to say.
Why are targeted though? What is going on in the hearts and minds of some Americans who think that their success is measured by their ability to put other communities down? What is that about? Raina, do you have a reaction to that? Why is racism just as prevalent today as it has always been? We saw in the murder of George Floyd that the entire country erupted into protests and demonstration. And young people, those protests and demonstrations are being led by young people, black and brown, white and yellow and red. People are saying they want fairness. Why is there such resistance to fairness? What is this about?
I don't think this is a controversial statement, but it may be. But racism is baked into.
It's baked in.
Mm-hmm.
It's baked in.
Racism is baked into all of our systems. And what we try to do is address racism, but all we do is address the symptoms of racism.
Very good.
We don't get to the root causes. And so when we're thinking about poll taxes and those literacy tests, or even modern poll taxes like what's happening in Florida with returning citizens and them being forced to have to pay their fines and fees before they can be re-enfranchised. That is a system that is not just wrong, it is immoral. And we have to break down systems in order to be able to address racism. So it's not just in the mind of these individuals, it's in the heart. And once we break down the systems, we break down what's in people's minds, we break down what's in people's hearts, we make those connections for them, we'll address these systems.
Good for you. Hassan, you want to add to that?
Just, in the same light, and even the civil rights movement did not finish the job.
That's correct.
The civil rights movement really dealt with the symbolic aspects of racism. It did not deal with the fundamental, with the systematic reasons for racism, including pay equity, including healthcare for all, including housing, including all aspects of life, including clean environments.
That's correct.
Including not poisoning African American and other immigrant kids in Flint and Michigan.
Yes, sir.
So all of this, we have to go back and ask ourselves how fundamentally, how systematically we can start removing these barriers to equity for all. And obviously there are these cultural issues.
Yes, sir.
That unfortunately became embedded in who we are. It's something that we're going to have to deal with.
So in part 2 of our voter preparedness and voter suppression, there was a spirited dialogue around civics and our youth. Our moderator was Anthony Lewis with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights, and we had guest Rhonda Clark, president of the Detroit League of Women Voters, and N. Charles Anderson, who's the president and CEO of the Detroit Urban League. Let's take a listen.
Because you talk about education in our young people and the need for more civic education in our curriculum, in our secondary curriculum. Could each of you go on to discuss what that means in terms of, from a down ballot perspective, also in understanding who is on our school board and the impact that has on what is taught in our schools?
Absolutely. The what they teach, I mean, I don't know if they're teaching government anymore, but I know we've worked with several schools to work with them about educating their students about government, how it works, the importance of voting, getting them registered. And yes, that curriculum, whoever makes the determination about the curriculum, that is somebody who should be focused on their civic duty and about democracy. So many students don't understand how that works at all. And so, yes, who who is elected has a definite effect, in addition to who gives money to the school board, how much money they get. That's also something that's voted in. Whoever holds the purse strings for the school boards, the school districts, the state educational fund, that too has a the impact on the education our students get.
Well, I mean, listen, let me tell you, I served on the Detroit School Board, and I've been a candidate for the school board election. And I tell you, it's very difficult and also disappointing sometimes to know that people go to the polls, they will vote at the top of the ballot, and then go home. They won't vote for down ballot issues, whether they're proposals or school board candidates. And school board candidates on most local ballots are probably the lowest level of elected officials around. And a lot of people use the school board as a springboard. They use it as a springboard to another election. If we look at some of the people right now who are in office, a lot of them got their start as a school board member. But I'm aware that when people go to the polls and they vote by name recognition or some other kinds of issue versus educating and informing. I think, Anthony, you're right. First of all, everybody thinks they know what's best for schools and for teachers, and we don't allow the professionals to do their job. That's why we hire superintendents. That's why we hire educational specialists, instructional specialists. We should focus on policy and governance and not on every little nuance in a school district operation. So you're absolutely right. Sitting at the school board, you have to advocate for the right kind of textbooks. You want to make sure that the African American experience is real. Some books only give one page to the civil rights movement when it's been a long going initiative. Some only give enough lip service to African American contributions. So school board members and school board leaders or district leaders, educators, we have to be focused on making sure that we are presenting the best educational opportunities available.
Our final episode in 2020 concluded with a no-holds-barred, candid conversation around economics and social and racial inequity between moderator Dr. Truman Hudson Jr., who's a lecturer at Wayne State University, and Professor Lester Spence, who's political science of Africana studies at Johns Hopkins University. They touched on everything from social justice issues, economic disparity, and the impact of worldwide protests and social movements.
When I looked out my window, I'm in Midtown, and I can look out to Woodward Avenue. And when I started seeing movements of people that didn't look like me protesting for weeks on end, I'm like, something is happening.
Right? And I mean, that's powerful. That's popular culture working, right? We can't vote our way into police reform. Like, voting is not going to be, in part, largely because the police, like education, the police are a state and city function. Right? So we can't Congress and Senate our way to all this stuff. Like, I love Rashida Tlaib. I'm so glad she represents my parents. Like, I claim her as my representative, even though I live 578 miles away. But Rashida Tlaib can't do anything about this. This is a state dynamic, right? So what we have to do is get folks to understand that vote. But we have to understand a whole other suite of policies, including disruptive protest, which is what this general strike is. Like, what they basically did was an old school 60s era labor strike and said, you know what, we're not coming back until this issue is taken care of. That type of thing generates change. We saw that, the three of us were kids. We grew up where the Confederacy was normal. I used to watch Dukes of Hazzard every Friday. Did you ever think that the state of Mississippi would change their flag because basically a large group of college football players were like, you know what? Y'all take down this flag and we're not playing.
In our lifetime.
In our lifetime. I knew Obama would be the first black president. I didn't really like him all that much, but I knew he'd be the first black president. There are all these things that I knew would come. I never thought that those, we got monuments outside of Hopkins. They took those down with the quickness. Like that's basically Black popular culture in working alongside and within and outside of Black social movements. That's how that happened.
Thank you all for joining us. You can watch all of the episodes of these conversations in full on New Detroit's Facebook page. Feel free to leave us a comment and suggest topics you'd like us to cover in the future. To find out more about our organization, visit us at newdetroit.org. On behalf of our President and CEO, Michael Rafferty, and our entire staff, we wish everyone a happy holiday season and a prosperous new year.